and expertise to small business owners almost entirely free of charge. So you find a mentor in your area. If they personally can't help you with, a specific business issue, whether it's financial, marketing, operations, there are other folks within that organization that they can refer you to. Most of these folks have been working in the business world for years. So they're a tremendous resource. So I highly encourage you to utilize the SCORE of folks. So thanks again, Teresa, for your partnership. We're going to talk a little bit about franchising today, but just briefly, the nickel tour of who I am. I'm a New England native. So those of you in the Massachusetts, New Hampshire, Maine, anywhere in New England. I grew up in Boston. I have well over 20 years of experience in franchise operations, marketing, finance, franchise business consulting. And now on the franchisee end, working with FranNet to help people explore small business ownership. So who is FranNet? Real quickly, we are a franchise consulting firm. What does that mean? It doesn't mean that we franchise business ideas. We do not do that, although we have partners. We do not help individuals that are franchisees in their business afterwards, although I can certainly assist in some ways and provide resources to existing owners and franchisees. What FranNet does is work with individuals, partnerships, husband and wives that are looking to potentially own a business in the franchise model, educate, provide information, and if it's something that somebody really wants to consider, then we would match them based on their background, their experience, their financial wherewithal, all number of parameters to ultimately make a match. So that's who we are, with several of us across North America. Again, partnerships with SCORE that are really, really in the Small Business Development Center, which are really valuable to us. We love being a partner. And we partner with only very reputable franchise companies. There are thousands of franchise concepts. We try to be a first filter on some of the more reputable and long tenured franchise organizations. So that's a little bit about who we are. And as I said, this is what we do. The point of this slide is just to let you know that as a potential client, much like SCORE, I do not get paid by a client. We operate on a commission basis with the franchise companies that we work with. So if you've ever worked with a recruiter, for instance, that's a very common analogy. Usually recruiters get paid by the company that would ultimately hire the individual. So it's a commission from the franchisor, the parent company, to me should a client ultimately become a franchisee. So it costs you nothing to work with a franchise consultant like myself. And it also, there's no markup. It's not like you're paying extra to the franchisor should you use a broker. I think the key point is we don't sell franchises either. We're here to help guide. So here's our agenda. We're going to talk a little bit about the why based on experience that we have over, again, 30 plus years. I've been doing this for 6 years. My firm has been doing it for over 30. So what are the common whys that we see? What are your options? It's not just franchising. There are certainly other legitimate options for being a business owner potentially. I will focus on franchising because that's my knowledge base. We're going to talk a little bit about the myths and hopefully debunk a few of them. And then if you were considering this, what are the initial steps to sort of get a framework for how you would approach finding the right option for you? We'll talk about that. So this is different for everybody. What is the why? And these are just some common themes that myself and my firm have seen over and over and over again for years. So the top thing, success, that's different for everybody, right? That's a subjective term. Everybody has their own set of criteria that determine success. But what we found for people that are considering this, these are some of the things that are missing and or things that they want more of. Fulfilled. They go to work every day. They've been doing it for years. Maybe it's gotten stale. They don't feel like they're contributing. They want more flexibility. Working for somebody else has its benefits for sure. I was a corporate employee for 25 years. And most of us at some point do work for somebody else. But flexibility can be an issue that people want to improve. Independence. I put this no more layoffs just because many of my clients are former folks from the corporate world that got caught up in a reduction in force, a layoff, and sometimes multiple versions, multiple experiences with a layoff. And they've decided to take control of their own career, their own life, both business-wise and personal, and hopefully, building wealth and building financial security for yourself through your own effort and not relying on somebody else. So that's some common themes. So let's talk about the options. This is America, right? Land of opportunity. So starting a business from scratch, obviously this country has a long heritage from that. And that continues today. So building your own business, potentially buying an existing business, just like homes. We buy and sell homes. There's a robust market for existing businesses. People retire, people move. So businesses are always for sale. So buying somebody else's business is an option, or becoming a franchisee. A franchisee is the individual owner for a franchise company, and that's an option as well. So let's go through some pros and cons on all three. If you were to start your own business, this is not an exhaustive list, but just some things to think about. Advantages: it's your business. You have total control. You make all the decisions. Great for people that have an idea, they're creative, they've done something in their past and says, you know what, I could do that better. There are no rules, right? This is your business completely. Probably the largest upside because of that. And it certainly is something that, maybe there's not a franchise specifically that really speaks to you in terms of your passion, your interest. So those are just some of the thoughts on the pros. Unfortunately, in some ways, a lot of those are the cons. Total control. You make all the decisions. Wow, that's a lot to consider, right? I have to wear all the hats. I've got to promote my business. I have to financially manage my business. I have to operationally run my business. I need to know about insurance. You got to wear all these hats, and there are folks like SCORE out there that can assist with that for sure. But it is a little daunting to have everything on your plate. As a small business owner, particularly if it's not something you've ever done before. So, the disadvantages are certainly those. A few others, in terms of funding it, that can be difficult unless you're going to completely fund it on your own. There are absolutely programs, the SBA, the Small Business Administration, but I would tell you, just having a business plan and going to a bank, that's something that happened years ago. Much harder to do now. Banks ultimately want to get paid back, so they want to see tremendous amount of experience, and maybe being a business owner before. So it could be harder to fund an existing, I should say, a new business on your own. Buying an existing business. I'll preface this by saying a good existing business. What does that mean? Well, something that's healthy, viable, good, good financial position, established customers. So some of the advantages here are it should have cash flow, positive cash flow, profitability, goodwill of customers and potentially employees. Actual financial results, that's really key. Having tax returns, profit and loss statements, a track record financially of its past is critical. It is attractive to lenders because of that track record. There should be a market established, customers, employees, as we talked about, and hopefully that owner has in some way documented the system. So you're a new owner. What are some of the key blocking and tackling things? Is it been documented in any way to help you navigate it? It's particularly in those first few years or months. Again, with the first slide, I'm sorry, some of the disadvantages could also be some of the advantages, right? If it's a distressed business, it may not be profitable. It may not have a good reputation with customers. There may be issues with employee defection. A couple of the things to really consider, why is somebody selling that business? I always say that there's some really good reasons. You're retiring, you're physically moving, or unfortunately, sometimes there's a health issue. I've seen that where the owner can no longer operate the business. Or in some cases, people are just really good at starting a business, but they're not great at operating it long term. Maybe they get bored. So, they built equity, they sell the business, they go on and do something else. If it's not one of those reasons, really ask a lot of questions, why are you trying to sell this business? So the motives is important. And then a good business will cost you. Just like your home. If you bought your home 20 years ago at X, it's probably worth X plus a lot. So there's equity there. And that owner of a business is looking to sell at a higher price than he or she bought it for or started it with, right? So that's going to cost you as the new owner. So it will be, relatively speaking, a little bit more expensive. And what if you were to buy a franchise? Again, not an exhaustive list, but a franchise oftentimes has name recognition. We know some of them. It should be some sort of intellectual property, whether it's websites or logos, licensing agreements. There should be some of that as part of the franchise. The key is a proven business system. This is why you're buying into and becoming a franchisee. You don't want to reinvent the wheel. So is it a highly repeatable, long track record with a system that you can follow? And it's documented, and they support you. Training, marketing, operations. Robust support is key to a franchise. Again, why you're buying into it. Relatively speaking, it's probably a lower failure rate because of some of that support. Any business can fail, including a franchise. Don't misunderstand. But if you were just to take one versus, straight up, your own business versus something that's already established in that space, likely a lower failure rate. Lower cost, only because you're not going to be making sort of some of the mistakes you might make as an owner. They've got a refined business. Better financing options because they're known entities in most cases. Disclosure we'll talk about later, but as a potential buyer, there's a lot of information available to you to evaluate the business and make a decision. And you have a franchise family, meaning the franchisor who is supporting you, but now your peers with other franchisees, other people doing the exact same thing. So sometimes owners in your local area, but certainly other parts of the country, and you can lean on those folks. I was talking to a client today who started 1 year ago, and he talked about the friendships and the support he's gotten from a franchisee in Oklahoma and one in Florida. So they become a family in that regard. Quick disadvantages, not a industry for every franchise. They tend to be very structured in their system. So if you're somebody that, sort of doesn't want to follow a system and kind of likes to do his or her own thing, a franchise honestly may not be the best route. There are territory restrictions. That just means it protects you in a particular area, but it also could limit, your growth potentially. You can only sell their products, and you will have to pay an ongoing royalty. Royalty is a stream of payments to that franchisor, and it's a trade-off, right? You get all the support in this business model and everything I've talked about, but there's a cost to it. It's not free. So I added this a few years ago because I get asked this often from clients when they're first sort of figuring out what they want to do, and I present an XYZ company, a particular concept, maybe a sign company. It's, well, I could just buy some printers and sign a lease and I'll be in business, and that's true. But these are the things to think about. And this is, again, not an exhaustive list, but I'm not going to go through all of them, but you get the idea that a franchise should have all of these questions figured out, or at least most of them. So these are the kinds of things you're going to have to think about. If you were to do it on your own, you know how to price your product. Do you know what suppliers to use? Do you know about the equipment if it requires equipment? You know how to build a website? What insurance do I need? There's a lot to consider, and that could be daunting on your own. So that's one of the benefits of a franchise is, again, that business model with a lot of these questions answered. So, reference franchise. What exactly does that mean? At its most simplest description, a franchise is a license agreement to use a company's entire process: name, trademarks, websites, logos, all that. There certainly the products, the whole business system. In exchange for, you're going to pay an initial franchise fee that varies from company to company, and it varies depending on the amount of territory, the number of locations you commit to. But you're going to have that upfront initial fee, and you will pay those ongoing royalties that I mentioned before. Typically paid monthly. It's very typically a percentage of the revenue that you're generating. So 5% of the revenue you generate every month, and again, it varies. Some are more, some are less, would go to that franchisor. So that's at its basic definition of what a franchise is. So I talked about disclosure. Okay, so now as a franchisee, or a potential franchisee, when you're starting to do your due diligence and learning, just like if you were to buy a stock or a mutual fund, you get a prospectus, you get a document that explains what it is that you're buying, what are the fees, how is it invested. Be thinking about, again, a mutual fund. So many years ago, the government decided that there was a little bit less or not enough structure around companies selling these business opportunities to people. So let's put some parameters, some guardrails around it. So to be a franchise company, to be a franchisor in this country, you have to file every year with updated information, what's called a franchise disclosure document. It's intended to provide investors, potential franchisees, with a lot of information to help them make a business decision. So I won't list everything, but the key ones are: what is the experience of the people running this franchise? Who are they? What is their background? Has that franchise company ever been bankrupt legally? So that's all public record, right? Have they ever gone through a bankruptcy? Have they ever been sued for any reason? And that goes both ways. Has the franchisor sued a franchisee or vice versa? So if you see a lot of litigation flying around, it might be a red flag. Costs, it's going to in very specific detail explain to you what the costs are to get into this business. And it'll be in a range, right? Because things cost different in Missouri than they do here. But you'll have a pretty tight spectrum of what it will cost to get in this concept. 125 to 150,000, for instance, to open a residential cleaning business with one territory and operate it for X number of months. At some point, you need to be self-sufficient, but there's working capital even built in for the opening months to get up and running and operating and generating revenue. It'll explain the royalties. Next page. It'll have the actual contract in there. It will define territory. What exactly am I buying? So one location of a Meineke protects you in 3 square miles around that location, for instance. Or one territory of Molly Maids, which is a residential cleaning company, is 50,000 households in these 3 zip codes, something like that. It's also going to provide some disclosure around financials. So that can vary. Sometimes they only show revenue. Sometimes they show full financial statements. It kind of varies amongst different companies, what they disclose, but you'll get some information around the financial possibility of the company. And the last thing that's really key, it's what we call validation. It's part of your due diligence. You will get to, if you're a serious potential investor, if you're a serious interested candidate for that company, you'll get to talk to current and maybe even past franchisees in that system. I mean, who wouldn't want to be able to have a conversation with, 4, 5, 6, 8 existing owners of that concept to find out what their experience is, what the support of the company is, would they do it again? That's all part of the due diligence for a franchise. That's pretty valuable in order for you to make a thorough, responsible decision. So that's the FDD. Let's talk about myths. And by the way, happy to answer any questions along the way or at the end as well. I know I'm kind of going fast and I talk fast sometimes, but I'm happy to clarify anything. So there's a few common myths. One, it's always fast food and retail. Who doesn't, like Jimmy John's or Jersey Mike's or Subway, Wendy's, McDonald's? These are all the ones that we know and we all utilize and we see driving around. They're very visible. And there's a lot of retail concepts that are franchised too. But the reality is, if we flip to the next one, is that there are many different options. Again, that 3,600, it varies, but it's well over 3,000. That's not locations. That's individual, separate franchise companies. McDonald's only being one. They have 13,000 of those 900,000 units in this country. So there's a number of concepts. Many of them you wouldn't even know were franchised, or the name, but didn't know it was a franchise. A lot of the things that you see vans driving around, whether it's a handyman business or a plumbing business, if it's not the local guy, there's a lot of franchise concepts in these different industries. Sign companies, business services, a lot of B2B, so business to business concepts. So it could be coaching. Again, it could be a sign company. It could be a marketing agency that's franchised. A lot of things in personal services, that could be, healthcare services, physical therapy, a nail salon, a lot in senior care, right? In-home senior care to allow people to stay in their home, but they need help. So suffice it to say, there's way more options than just a food concept. And here are some of the, I mentioned a few of them, but if you think about, there's a bunch of companies in damage restoration for essential services, right? Everybody needs their haircut. Got mine done this morning. If you think about demographics, right now coming out of COVID, a lot of people have done work in their homes and modified, or decided not to move, but upgrade their home. So people are always spending money on their home. So all things around residential services. And then the B2B, as I mentioned, staffing is another big area, companies that help other companies find employees. So a lot of different options. This is a little bit counterintuitive, but if we think about McDonald's, if we go to the next slide and you say, okay, wildly successful, one of the original, names in franchising, been around for 55 years. But, if we think about the product itself, is it the best hamburger? No, they probably even acknowledge that. We could all do better on our own grill. But that's not what McDonald's necessarily is about. It's predictable. It's convenient. It's all those things. So why would somebody want to hawk a product or service that isn't the best out there? Well, because it does serve a purpose. But what really makes a franchise company successful And if you think about McDonald's as a great example, they do all these things extraordinarily well. So yes, the product is average, and there's nothing wrong with that. But if you're a business owner of that system, they're excellent marketers. They're amazing trainers. Many of the executives of a concept like McDonald's started out as a manager in a store. I mean, what great, story is that? I started out, in a store, and now I'm the president of a division or something. Stories like that all the time in these big concepts, franchise concepts. They're great at real estate, all the back office issues around accounting and those sorts of things that don't seem like they're important. But if you're a business owner, you're trying to grow your business and work on it, and anything administrative that's not streamlined is taking away time. So this is why franchise businesses are so successful, because they have these business systems refined. Another one that's a little counterintuitive. I think we all always think, well, if I'm going to own a business, it needs to be something new and nobody's ever done before, kind of thing. Like, there's too much competition. I have to have something that nobody's ever had or done before, an invention. But the reality is that most good franchise concepts actually go after businesses that sometimes seem boring, but are already in existence, and they just have a more refined process to deliver that service. How many times have you called, I don't know, somebody to come to your house and for new shades in your house or something to do with your floor, and nobody answers the phone. They do 2 days later. I'll come out next week. They don't show. On and on and on. They do show. I'll come back in 2 weeks with a quote, and it's just this really cumbersome, poor experience. That's where good franchises see an opportunity. They come in and they're able to provide a better experience. And oftentimes they'll go where there's other competition because they know they can do it better. So again, it's more about executing than coming up with something new and different that nobody's ever done before. Yeah, this is now getting way more common, right? I could never be a business owner in general, right? It's just way too expensive. It's $1 million or more. That's only for people that are already wealthy. That's a very common misconception. Because the reality is, although 200, 250, 300,000 is still a lot of money, it's certainly not $1 million. And so again, the visible things we see, like a McDonald's, Panera that I work for, yeah, those are all 7-figure. To put one location up could be close to $2 million. Like, not most people don't have that. But the reality is, if you look at the numbers here, from 50 to call it 500,000, that's almost 75% of the concepts that are out there. So think about that 3,500. The vast majority of franchise businesses are not the expensive things that we see driving around. So it kind of coincides with, hey, it's not all just food and retail. Well, it's not just all very expensive concepts. You can see, over 500,000 is still a quarter. But, again, these are restaurants, hotels that are massive investments. Those are different people doing that. Most of the concepts are in that 50 to 500,000 range. And that, frankly, are the people I'm working with. Side note, okay, well, say it's $200,000 investment to get into XYZ business that fits me. Well, I don't have that much either. Well, think about a franchise business, or frankly, even an existing business oftentimes. Think about it as like a home. Most people can't buy a home for cash. They have a mortgage, but you usually put money down, right? You have some sort of down payment. So think about an existing business or even a franchise, a new franchise business in the same way. You're going to have equity, money, liquid money, right? Cash. You're going to have to put some money down, have some skin in the game right out of the gate, out of your pocket. But the rest of it can be financed. And this is just one common scenario. Some of it, there are some companies you could even finance up to 90% of it. All right, how would I do that? You get, again, personal savings at some level. You got to have some money available. It's not going to be 100% bank financed or whatever. The rich uncle is my joke, right? Sometimes you see that, at least to help with the down payment. But the real other sources that are common and legitimate is equity in your home. Sometimes what's called a securities-backed line of credit or a portfolio loan can be utilized. That's if you have a stock and bond portfolio. Maybe there's a little bit of money there, but you don't want to sell it. You could take a loan against it. SBA financing should have been on here. Actually, I got to update this, but a small business administration loan, which is a government-backed bank loan, is a very common source. Probably half my clients utilize some form of SBA financing. And again, it's a bank loan from a typical Eastern bank. What are the local big banks? But it's government-backed, which is attractive to those banks because the government will pay a portion of that back should there be a default. So SBA loans are very common. The last one, real quick, 401k or IRA. There's a program that's been approved by the IRS for decades that allows you to take money if you have a 401k, an IRA, one of those vehicles, financial vehicles. You can take money from that before you're 59 and a half and use that money to finance a business, part or in whole, without the penalty, the prepayment penalty that you normally incur if you just took money out for another reason, and without tax. So we're all going to, if we have 401ks when we turn 60, we're all, at some point when we start utilizing, we'll get taxed. But in order, you can use it to fund a business without it being penalized or taxed. There's some administrative costs, but the reason the government does that is because if you start and grow a business, you're going to pay income taxes from the business, but you're also going to generate jobs, typically, people working for you, and that's attractive to the government to create jobs. So another source, and these are some companies that do that we work with. High return requires a high investment. This is a common one. The more I invest, the more I can make. And the reality is there isn't a correlation. So I've talked about, we can flip to the next. If I've talked about, two businesses that are at the opposite ends of sort of the investment spectrum, or a cleaning business, you go into people's homes and you clean it, Molly Maid. That's a very modest investment, relatively low in the whole scheme of things. Whereas a restaurant, a lease for a building, equipment, chairs and tables, and it's expensive. And the reality is there's no guarantee on either one, frankly. I mean, any business can fail. So the idea, the more I invest, the bigger the number, a restaurant should automatically make me more money, and that's not true. So, it's a little confusing, but just don't have or go into it thinking, okay, I have to spend a lot of money in order to make a lot of money. There isn't a direct linear correlation to those two things. You can be, very successful, and it can be very lucrative to own a service business like a cleaning business without a massive investment, and vice versa. A very expensive restaurant, unfortunately, we've seen them, go out of business. Was there one day and not the next. So no automatic correlation there. And the last one, and this may be my favorite, because when I present concepts to folks, say it's Meineke, say it's Great Clips that cuts men's hair. the first reaction is, well, why are you showing me this? I'm not a barber. I'm not a mechanic. Why would I do that? And the answer is because everything else we've talked about could fit you. So they don't. Franchisors are not looking for people in Meineke to change brakes or fix brakes or gray clips to cut hair. They want people that understand and will use their system, and then bring all these transferable skills they have from their prior background professionally and their experience. So if you're somebody that has hired people, developed people, managed people, that's the kind of skill that they're looking for. You're comfortable doing, you've done it in your past, you're good at it. People that have got great communication skills, maybe people that are sales and business development savvy, another transferable skill. You're financially capable of managing a business. These are all the sort of executive level skills that franchisors are looking for. You're going to hire mechanics and you're going to hire barbers or hairstylists to execute the actual service. They want people that have these skills to run a business and not be in it every day. So hopefully that makes sense. You don't necessarily have to have the individual specific skill to be a successful owner. So if I was to be a business owner, is it only just, there's only one path to that? Meaning, is it just, this is going to be my full-time job? And for most people, it would be. So, your typical owner operator, that's going to be somebody that's involved in it day to day. And that doesn't mean, again, that you're cutting hair at Great Clips, but it does mean that you're managing the manager there. And if you have 2, 3, 4 of them, there could be several people you're managing. You're hiring people, you're managing those people, you're marketing and trying to grow your business. So, you're working on the business every day, not necessarily, at the location at a desk, the front desk greeting people, but that's your full-time endeavor as the owner operator. But there is another option, and it's not for everybody. And there's many concepts that it doesn't fit, but there are businesses and there are franchisors that are looking for folks that aren't necessarily going to be involved on the day-to-day in the weeds. They want people that are going to hire managers. This is usually a brick and mortar sort of location concept. They're going to hire managers to do the day-to-day. They just want them to be truly executive oversight. So there are a lot of folks that have, their own job still. They keep their job. That job probably needs to be very flexible, right? You're not going to, if you're somebody that needs to go 9 to 5 and not have any interruptions, it may not be a good fit. But there are a lot of concepts out there that are built for and intended to be semi-absentee owned, 20, maybe 30 hours a week, maybe less. And what it's really intended is for, again, these multi-unit concepts. You're going to manage a manager, and they're for people that want a supplemental or secondary income stream to their full-time job. So there's a couple of different ways to be an owner. This is just some examples. Again, one of the things it's probably a myth too, in some ways, is that a lot of people think, well, there's only certain people that are franchise owners or business owners in general. That's a very specific DNA, and that may be true, but there's no real one profile of somebody. It's not just a person that, from the day I was 10 years old with a paper route, I've always been a business owner. Or it's just one profession that really makes for a really good franchisee or business owner. It's not true. They come from all walks of life, all backgrounds, and doesn't mean that they have business ownership in their blood, grandfather to father to them. That's certainly common, and there's a lot of that out there. But most of my clients had never owned a business before. They came from a corporate job, and they decided to make a change at that point in their life. And again, these are just some of the the backgrounds of people. It's all over the place. What I will tell you is there are a couple of things you need to be prepared for. One, you got to be able to follow that system. Two, there's going to be ups and downs. So know that it's going to be a little bumpy, particularly in the beginning. There's probably a level of perseverance and grit required for somebody to be a business owner, because there will be challenges. But if you're willing to put that work in and understand and have those expectations, it could be, you can come from any background or any walk of life. We like to say in franchising that, one of the things that makes it a little bit different than owning your own business, starting your own business, buying an existing business is, this is a nuanced thing. You're in business for yourself. As a franchisee, you still have to get up every day and do the work. The franchisor is not doing it for you. They've provided the blueprint. They've got support. But where the rubber meets the road, as they say, on a day-to-day basis, in that market, in that location, is you or she, the franchisee. So you're in business for yourself, but you are fortunately not by yourself. You have that franchisor support, and you have the peer group, other franchisees that are doing the same thing you do, and that you can commiserate with, get advice from, and speak to challenges, and you can lean on one another. So the last segment here is just some things to think about as a go-forward position, if you're interested. The first and foremost is for me to always tell a client to separate the function of the business. What does the business do? Go back to Meineke. The business of Meineke is to fix cars. So that's what it does, but separate that from what the owner does. So if you click again, the function of the business versus the business owner, right? So you as the business owner are managers, you're hiring people, you're managing them, you're managing the finances, you're growing your business, you're marketing, you're out networking. So again, what the business does versus what the owner does in the business. Be very clear on what you want your role as an owner to be. I work for Panera Bread. I use this example all the time. Bakers, I did it once. I can't believe they do this. Folks that work the third shift, I love them. They come in at 10 at night, leave at 6 in the morning. They're passionate. They love to bake, right? They put love into it. They're baking fresh stuff overnight for customers the next day. But for that person to be owner of a bakery, they got to understand that they likely won't be baking. They're going to be managing their staff, and they're going to be managing, the food that's coming in and checking that in and paying people and all these other tasks, right? So a baker wanting to own a bakery, they could bake, but somebody else has to do all those other functions. So just be real clear on what you are going to be doing every day as an owner versus what the business actually does. Key thing to consider. Second, make an inventory of what's important to you. What is truly critical, important to you. I've had folks that have come to me and said, I was in a corporate world, I made great money. So yeah, a business needs to be profitable. I don't want to lose money, but that's not the number one motivation for me. I want to be involved in my community. I want to do something that interests me. There's all sorts of reasons why, beyond just making tons of money, that somebody, and there's it's usually some sort of combination, right? But know what's important to you in this. Is it about a challenge? Are you trying to build, maybe an equity for retirement through a business? Is it just more flexibility? Being a business owner is a lot of work, but it's also more flexible. You're not tied to a desk necessarily. Maybe you have to work a weekend, but Wednesday afternoon, maybe you're going to a kid's soccer game. So you have more control in that regard. Again, community involvement could be, there's many reasons, but everybody's different. Make your list. So make your list. Then the third thing, ask yourself what you're good at. what are the things that I've done in my past that could be applied? We call them transferable skills. So if you're in a staffing business, one of the key components of an owner is to be really good, frankly, at business development and sales. You need to be able to find clients, other businesses that need your service. So that could be calling people, that could be knocking on the door, that be going to networking meetings. You got to be, a handshaker and a baby kisser. That's a key uh, part of owning, especially initially, owning a staffing business. So if you're really good at sales and marketing and you like that, that could be a good fit. Maybe you're better at just, servicing customers that come in the door. I don't want to be out knocking on doors selling, but when somebody comes to my location or my business, I have tremendous customer service and they're going to have a great experience. Maybe that's your skill. Logistics, you're really good at, operations. Think about restaurants. You don't have to do a whole lot of sales and marketing and business development and promotion. That comes through doing a really good job at the location with quality food, great service. That's what sells. People word of mouth will do that. But if you can't execute, every day, that'll be a tough slog, right? So if you're good at operations, maybe a restaurant's good for you. I think you get the point. I mean, you got to know what you're good at, what you want to do, and then identify the business that needs those skills. And then the last thing is, okay, I get the first three, I get that. What do I do versus what the business does? What are my transferable skills? And then, what what do I want to be doing every day? That's the last piece. What does it look like when I go to that place of business? Whether it's remote, whether it's a service business out in the field or a location. Do I like managing large teams, or do I only want 4 employees? Do I want to only work with other business owners, or do I like, sort of end user customers, right? Do I want to be working with a specific product? Like I like to, touch, feel, see, or am I better or I have more experience delivering a service? Do I want to own just one location or unit, or I want to build, sort of my own mini empire? These are all part of the goals that people have, but also what your day in the life wants to be. The business environment. I'm just wearing a polo shirt right now. Some people, more blue collar. Some people, want to be with other sort of white collar folks, business coaching. So they're in a suit a lot. What does that day to day sort of look like? I know, kind of an abrupt ending, but just some things to think about. And those, that's sort of the next steps. Those last 4 slides to sort of give you a little bit of a roadmap about what to think about. So thank you so much, Teresa. I'm so sorry you had to keep advancing slides for me, but I can't thank you enough.
Oh, you know what? It wasn't a problem. I think it worked out just fine. I don't have any questions submitted. We did have your contact information there at the end if anyone should have any questions for you. Also know that we do have SCORE mentors that have owned franchises and can help answer questions as well. I guess we can go ahead and wrap up for today. And thanks, Dana, for presenting, and thank you all for joining us. We hope to see you again in the future.
Thank you, Teresa. Bye,
Bye.
folks.